Zanil was only 18 when her whole world shattered in one night. The air in the small house in Pietermaritzburg was thick with anger. Her father, Mr. Dlamini, threw her old blue suitcase out the door so hard that it burst open on the dusty ground. "You think you're grown," he shouted, his face red with rage. "Then go be grown." Her mother, Nomsa, stood by the doorway with her arms crossed, lips pressed tight, saying nothing. That silence hurt more than her father's words. Zanil had begged them to understand. She wasn't being selfish. She just wanted to save her weekend salary from the cafe job to pay for college. She dreamed of studying fashion design, of creating things with her hands instead of just surviving. But her father said dreams don't feed families, and her mother only turned away. From the couch, her younger brother Sifiso laughed cruelly. "Good riddance," he muttered. "One less mouth to feed." Those words burned in her chest as she picked up her torn clothes from the dirt, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall in front of them. That night, she ended up on a friend's couch, clutching her small bag and staring at the ceiling. The room smelled faintly of detergent and hope, something she hadn't felt in a long time. With a trembling voice, she whispered into the dark, "One day, I'll never have to beg them for love or a roof again." It was the night everything changed. The night pain became her promise. The months after Zanil was kicked out felt like walking through fire. Every morning before the sun rose, she dragged herself out of bed in her friend's small apartment and walked miles to the clothing factory. The machines were loud, the air thick with dust, and her hands were always sore from stitching for hours. But she never complained. She needed the money, rent, food, and a little saved for her dream. When her shift ended, she didn't rest. At night, she cleaned offices in the city, empty rooms that smelled of coffee and air freshener. She'd mop the same floors where other people chased their dreams during the day, and sometimes she'd imagine herself working in one of those offices, dressed sharp, confident, and free. Her only luxury was a second-hand laptop she bought from a man on the street. The screen flickered, the battery barely lasted, but it became her classroom. She'd sit up until midnight, eyes heavy, watching free online tutorials about design and sewing. She took notes on scraps of paper and practiced sketches with a borrowed pencil. Sometimes she passed her old home on the way to the bus stop. Her parents would be outside, laughing with neighbors, as if she had never existed. They didn't look sad or guilty, and that cut deeper than anything. But instead of breaking her, it made her stronger. Every step she took away from that house felt like a step toward her future. At the factory, Zanil began collecting small pieces of fabric from the trash bins, colorful scraps no one wanted. During lunch breaks, while others scrolled on their phones, she'd sit in a corner sketching bag designs on notebook paper. She had no fancy tools, no sewing machine of her own, but she had vision. One evening, a co-worker saw her sketches and said, "These are beautiful, Zanil. You should sell them." That small compliment lit something inside her. Maybe she really could build something. Soon, she started stitching her first handmade bag using leftover fabric, an old needle, and thread from her cleaning kit. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. What began as survival, long hours, sleepless nights, and lonely meals, slowly turned into purpose. Zanil was no longer just trying to make it through the day. She was creating a future, one stitch at a time, driven by pain, hope, and a quiet promise to herself. "I will make something beautiful out of what they threw away." It all started with one woman from the office where Zanil cleaned at night. She had seen the colorful bag Zanil carried, the one made from fabric scraps and old zippers, and asked, "Where did you buy that?" When Zanil shyly said she made it herself, the woman's eyes lit up. "Can you make one for me?" Zanil agreed, charging only a little because she didn't think her work was worth much yet. But when the woman came back a week later, holding the bag proudly, her co-workers wanted one too. Then another person asked, then another, until she had 10 orders waiting. It was the first time in years Zanil felt seen for something good. People started calling her the girl who makes magic from waste. Soon, her evenings turned into long nights filled with thread, fabric, and soft music playing from her phone to keep her awake. Her tiny rented room became her workshop. The floor was covered in fabric scraps, and the table by the window was where she cut, stitched, and dreamed. Every stitch felt like a piece of her heart being sewn into the bags. One afternoon, her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Hello, this is Naledi from Durban Style Boutique," said a warm voice. "I saw your work online. Can you supply 20 bags a month for our store?" Zanil froze for a moment, staring at the wall, trying not to cry. "Yes," she said quickly, even though she had no team, no sewing machine, and no clue how she would make that many bags. But she believed she would find a way. That night she didn't sleep. She stitched until dawn, her fingers aching, bleeding a little, but her heart was alive like never before. She saved every cent from the sales, bought a second-hand sewing machine, and started improving her designs. Each new order came with new challenges, but she refused to give up. Sometimes she'd look at the pile of finished bags and whisper, "You did this, Zanil. You really did this." By the end of the year, her small dream had turned into something real. She named her brand Zon Wear, short for her name and the word wear, because she wanted people to wear her story. Without investors, without family support, just grit, faith, and endless nights, Zanil built the foundation of something powerful. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was becoming. By the time Zanil turned 22, life finally started to feel like hers. She had saved enough to move out of the small room she rented and into her own little apartment. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place with white walls, big windows, and space for her sewing machine. On her first night there, she sat on the floor eating noodles straight from the pot, smiling through tears. It wasn't much, but it was hers, her peace, her proof. A few months later, she took another leap of faith and opened a small studio in Durban. It was barely big enough for 3 tables, but to her, it felt like a palace. She hired 2 women, both single mothers who had been struggling to find steady work. She taught them how to cut fabric, how to stitch clean lines, how to believe they could do more than just survive. "We rise together," she told them, her voice filled with warmth and determination. Every month their little business grew. Orders came from Johannesburg, Cape Town, even abroad. People loved the story behind her brand, how she turned waste into art. She started receiving letters from young girls saying, "You give me hope." Those words meant more to her than any paycheck ever could. But even with all the success, a small ache never left her heart. Her parents hadn't called, not once. No congratulations. No we're proud of you, not even a text. Sometimes she'd stare at her phone, wondering if they even thought about her. She tried to tell herself it didn't matter, but on quiet nights it did. Then came her 25th birthday, the day she opened her first official Zonwear store in Durban. The shop looked beautiful, bright, bold colors, her name printed proudly on the front glass. After the ribbon cutting, she took a picture standing in front of the sign, wearing one of her handmade dresses, smiling like the storm had finally passed. She posted it online with a caption that came straight from her heart. "From the girl they kicked out, to the woman who built her own door." She put her phone down, not thinking much of it, but by morning everything had changed. The post went viral. Thousands of people shared it, calling her an inspiration. "This is the kind of story we need," one comment read. Another said, "You turned pain into power." Zanil sat in her shop that morning, tears in her eyes, realizing something she had long forgotten. She didn't need her family's validation anymore. The world had finally seen the woman she fought to become. Years rolled by, and time wasn't kind to the Dlamini family. Mr. Dlamini lost his factory job after the company downsized. One morning, he came home early with a brown envelope in his hand and a blank look on his face. "They said they don't need me anymore," he muttered. Namsa tried to stay strong, but her small grocery shop was already struggling. Prices went up, customers went down, and soon, shelves that were once full stood half empty. The laughter that used to echo outside their house faded into silence. Bills piled up on the kitchen table. Debt collectors started coming by, their voices cold and firm. "You've missed too many payments, Mr. Dlamini." They tried everything, borrowing from relatives, selling old furniture, even pawning their wedding rings. But it wasn't enough. The day finally came when the bank officials arrived with papers. "We're repossessing the house," one of them said, his tone flat and final. Namsa broke down right there, falling to her knees on the same porch where years ago she had stood, arms folded, watching her daughter walk away. "Please, not the house," she begged. But rules were rules. Within weeks, they had to pack what little they owned into a few boxes. They turned to Sifiso, their son, now married but struggling himself. He looked at them with cold eyes and said, "You made your bed, now lie in it." The words hit them like a mirror, the same heartless tone they once used on Zanil. For the first time Mr. Dlamini couldn't speak, and for the first time Namsa cried, really cried, the kind that comes from regret too deep to fix. Late that night she whispered through tears, "We should have never turned her away. Maybe this is our punishment." Mr. Dlamini just sat there staring into space, realizing how cruel life could be when pride replaces love. Days later the house went up for sale. The walls still carried faint marks of Zanil's childhood drawings, the corners still held echoes of her laughter, memories that refused to fade. At the property office, a buyer waited quietly to sign the final papers. The officials smiled. "You're lucky, Ms. Dlamini. You got the place for a good price." She smiled softly, pen in hand. "Yes," she said, signing her name with calm confidence. "I know this house well." They had no idea that the woman reclaiming their home was the same daughter they once threw away, the girl they told to go be grown. Now she was back, not for revenge but for closure. When Zanil arrived at the property office, her heart was pounding. The same address printed on the papers in her hand, her old home, the house that once held her tears, her anger, her pain. She stood by the gate for a moment, frozen. Memories came rushing back like a flood. The night her father threw her suitcase out, the laughter of her brother, the silence of her mother, and the long cold walks with nowhere to go. But strangely, she didn't feel anger anymore. She didn't feel the urge to prove anything. What she felt was power. Quiet, calm, unshakable power. The kind that comes when you've survived everything meant to break you. Inside the office, the real estate agent smiled brightly and said, "Congratulations, Ms. Dlamini. The house is officially yours." Zanil took the keys in her hand and stared at them for a long time. The cold metal felt heavy, not just with ownership but with history. "It's yours now," the agent added. She smiled softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, finally mine." When she drove back to Pietermaritzburg that afternoon, the road looked different, familiar yet new. The same trees lined the path, the same old corner store still stood, but she wasn't the same girl anymore. She parked outside the house and stepped out slowly, heels clicking on the pavement. The gate creaked just like it used to. The paint was faded, the garden overgrown, but she could still picture her younger self sitting on those steps, crying and dreaming of a better life. For a moment, her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of pride. She had done it. She walked up to the front door and ran her fingers along the old wood. She could almost hear her father's voice echoing in her head. "You think you're grown? Then go be grown." She smiled to herself and whispered, "I did." Zanil didn't post anything online. There was no need to tell the world. This victory wasn't for likes or comments. It was for her soul. Standing in front of the house she once begged to stay in, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The air smelled like dust and memories, but it felt like peace. She whispered softly, "I made it." And in that moment, under the same sky that once watched her walk away in tears, Zanil knew she had come full circle, not to relive the past but to own it. A few weeks later, the news reached them like a whisper that turned into a storm. Zanil was the one who had bought their old house. Mr. and Mrs. Dlamini couldn't believe it at first. Namsa dropped the cup in her hand, her face pale. "Our daughter, she owns it," she said softly, tears filling her eyes. Mr. Dlamini said nothing. He just stared out the window, his pride cracking for the first time. 2 days later, they found the courage to go see her. They stood outside her new home, a beautiful house with white walls, neat gardens, and the name Zonware Designs printed on the gate. It looked nothing like the small place she had once begged to stay in. Namsa's hands shook as she knocked on the door. When Zanil opened it, she froze. For a few seconds no one said a word. Her mother was the first to speak. "Zanil," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, We have nowhere else to go." Her father stood beside her, silent and stiff, his eyes filled with something she had never seen before: regret. The proud man who once shouted, "Go be grown," now couldn't even meet her gaze. Zanil stood quietly, her heart heavy. For years she had imagined this moment, what she'd say if they ever came back. Part of her wanted to remind them of the nights she slept on floors, the days she went hungry, the years she cried alone. But another part of her, the woman who had fought and grown, couldn't bring herself to hate them. "You threw me out when I needed a home most," she said softly, her eyes glistening. "But I won't do the same." Her mother broke down, sobbing. "I'm sorry, my child. We were wrong. We were foolish." Zanil nodded slowly. "I know," she said. "But some lessons come with pain." Then after a pause she added, "I have a small rental house nearby. It's clean, safe and paid for, but it's not free." Her mother looked up in surprise. "Not free?" "No," Zanil said gently but firmly. "You'll pay rent like everyone else. Maybe this time you'll value it." Mr. Dlamini's lips quivered. He wanted to say thank you but couldn't. He just nodded silently. As they walked away, Zanil watched them from the porch, not with anger but with peace. She had given them something greater than a home, a chance to learn the worth of what they once took for granted. For the first time, she realized forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was strength. It didn't take long for the news to spread through the neighborhood. Zanil bought her parents' house. People whispered about it at the market, in taxis, even outside church on Sunday morning. Some shook their heads and said, "How could she do that to her own parents?" Others smiled and said, "No, that's justice. That's what happens when you throw away your own blood." But Zanil didn't care what anyone thought. She had stopped living for approval a long time ago. While the town gossiped, she stayed focused, pouring her energy into Zonwear, growing her brand, hiring more women, and opening a second studio in Johannesburg. Her business was blooming, but more than that, her story had started to inspire thousands. Young women across KwaZulu-Natal began writing to her, saying things like, "Because of you, I'm saving for my dream," or, "You taught me that I can start with nothing and still become something." Every message touched her heart deeply. She would sit at her desk reading their words, smiling with tears in her eyes, whispering, "If my pain can give someone hope, then it was worth it." Soon, her story caught the attention of local media. TV reporters and radio hosts called, asking to feature her journey. She appeared on morning shows, her calm voice and humble smile winning hearts everywhere. She didn't talk about revenge or pride. She spoke about growth, about learning to love yourself even when others don't. During one interview, the host asked, "Zanil, what message do you have for young people who feel lost or unloved?" She paused for a moment, thinking of that night years ago when she was thrown out with a suitcase and tears in her eyes. Then she said softly, "The world doesn't owe you love, but you owe yourself respect. Don't wait for people to see your worth, show them by how you rise." Her words went viral. People shared the clip everywhere, calling her the girl who turned rejection into redemption. Schools began inviting her to speak to students. She'd stand on stage, holding one of her handmade bags, saying, "This started with scraps, and so did I. But look at what both became." And while others argued whether she was right or wrong for buying her parents' house, Zanil knew one thing for sure. She had finally become the woman her younger self always needed. Months passed, and slowly, the heavy silence between Zanil and her parents began to soften. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't easy. It started with small gestures. A text from her mother asking how business was going, a hesitant knock at her store door. Her mother began stopping by the shop on quiet afternoons. She would walk in pretending to browse, touching the handmade soaps and neatly folded fabrics, but Zanil knew she just wanted to talk. Sometimes they spoke about the weather, sometimes about recipes, and sometimes they just stood in silence, both holding back emotions they didn't know how to express. One day, as Zanil packed an order, her mother's voice broke the air. "You became everything we feared," she said softly, tears shining in her eyes. "Successful without us." Zanil looked up, her hands trembling slightly. For years she had imagined this moment, the confrontation, the apology, the tears. But standing there now, she didn't feel anger. She felt peace. She walked around the counter and hugged her mother tightly. "I didn't become what you feared, Mama," she whispered. "I became everything you taught me not to be. Brave, independent, and strong. And I'm still grateful for the lessons, even the painful ones." Her mother sobbed quietly in her arms, and for the first time in years, Zanil felt the warmth of home, not from walls or roofs, but from forgiveness. Her father, though, remained distant. He was too proud, too weighed down by guilt to say a word. But one afternoon, as Zanil arranged flowers in the store window, she heard slow footsteps behind her. When she turned, her father was standing there, holding a small clay pot with a single green plant sprouting from it. He didn't look her in the eyes. He just muttered, "For your office." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a speech. But for Zanil it was enough. She smiled softly and took the pot from his hands, her eyes filling with quiet tears. "Thank you, Baba," she said gently. He nodded once, turned, and walked away slowly. Zanil placed the pot on her office desk, right by the window where sunlight hit every morning. Every time she saw it grow, she was reminded of how far she'd come, from being thrown out to owning the home, from being unwanted to becoming unstoppable, from pain to peace. Healing, she realized, didn't always come with words. Sometimes it bloomed in silence, just like that little plant. A year later, Zanil stood at the grand opening of her new flagship store, a dream she once thought was impossible. The building was filled with laughter, soft music, and the scent of fresh flowers. People from all over the city had come to celebrate her success. She looked radiant, wearing a cream suit that made her look every bit the powerful woman she had become. At the back of the crowd, her parents stood quietly. Her mother held her father's arm, both of them looking proud yet humbled. They didn't need to say anything. The look in their eyes said it all. When it was time for Zanil to speak, she took the microphone and smiled at the faces watching her. "A few years ago," she began softly, "I stood outside a gate, begging to be let in. That night I thought my world had ended. But now I see. Sometimes the rejection you fear most is the push you truly need." The audience grew silent, listening closely. Her voice didn't shake. It carried calm strength. "Forgiveness," she continued, "doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means freeing yourself from the pain. It means moving forward, even when others said you couldn't." The room filled with applause, cheers, and even tears from a few who knew her story. Her parents clapped too, eyes glistening. After the event, Zanil stepped outside for some fresh air. The evening sky glowed gold as she walked toward her car. Across the street stood the house she once called home, the same house where her journey began. She smiled softly, whispering, "Thank you for kicking me out." Because that night didn't break her, built her. It made her the woman standing there, strong, successful, and finally at peace.